Alrighty. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. Sorry, we got started a little bit late. But my name is Karissa Jacobson, and I work on developer content at DocuSign. And today I'm going to be talking about one of the sample apps that DocuSign has. So over here on the Developer Center, you can see all of the sample apps that DocuSign has, and they showcase various features of DocuSign and some of the different APIs. As you can see, they have the little tags here for like Rooms API, Click API, eSignature, etc. But today we're going to be focusing on the MyUni sample application. So here it is. Here, and as you can see, this is just a sample application that kind of mimics what a DocuSign integration might look like in the education industry. Over here, if we click on the About tab, you can see even more information about the app and some of the features that are included and some more resources to get started with DocuSign. And then back on the home page, you can see we have these three scenarios: changing your major or minor, requesting an unofficial transcript, or signing up for extracurricular activities. And then below, you can see what features are associated with each of the three scenarios. So I'll go ahead and run through one of the scenarios just so that we can get a little glimpse of how the app works, and then I'll go into the code and see how everything is going behind the scenes. So first I'll need to log in, and this app has two authentication flows. You can either log in with your developer account, which will use the authorization code grant flow, or we can continue with a pre-configured login, which is what I'll do now. And that uses a JWT or JSON Web Token authentication, which I can show later if there's interest. Okay, so now that I'm logged in, I'm going to go ahead and get started on change your major or minor. So here it takes me to this field where I can fill in this information, which will be used later when I'm taken to the document to sign. And then if you click this See Behind the Scenes tab, you can see, again, the features that are associated and then a bit more about the code flow for this example. So you can see we use the envelopes create method and the create recipient method, which I'll again show later after I run through this example. So I'll go ahead and just type in some dummy information here. And I'll type in some major and minors. And this form also includes form validation. So for example, if this wasn't a valid email address, it'll catch that, and then it also makes sure that all of these other fields are filled in as well. All of these are required fields. Okay. So now I'll go ahead and click Request for Field Change. Right, and that's going to take me to this embedded signing session. So it's pretty cool. You can sign the document right within your app, and you don't have to wait for an email or anything like that to start a signing session. So I'll just agree to use electronic records and signatures, and then click Continue. And then you can see all of my information that I had put in on the form has been pre-filled onto this document. The email address is outlined in red, and you can see it's actually editable, so I could change that if I wanted to before signing, but it is required. And now after clicking sign, I can choose what kind of signature I want to use. So I can either select a style, and there's a bunch that I could choose from here, or I could also choose to draw it, whatever. Or I could also upload if I wanted, but I'll just use this. And so I'll sign, and that also included my initials. So now everything looks good, and I can choose finish, or I can also choose some of these other actions here, but I'll just choose finish. And then it takes me back to my app, to this signing complete page. And you could see like the possible signing return events over here on the side. And then I have the option to go back to home, or I can view my submissions. So view my submissions will take me over to this status tab, which which will have a list of all of the documents that you've signed on the app in the session. And so you can see I have my change my minor major fields document over here. And then I can choose to download either the signed document or the summary or both. And as you can see here, I chose both, so you can see the document with my signature as well as the certificate of completion and all of these other information over here. Cool. So that's basically the flow for the first code example. So now, since I want to make up a little bit for lost time, and we're about 16 minutes in already, I'll go ahead and look at the code. All of this code is available publicly on our GitHub page. You can find the link to the GitHub page at this GitHub source here. Yeah, so any of you can go in and download this code if you want to play around with it yourself. But yeah, so now I'll go over to the code here so you can see how that was implemented. So this app uses Python on the back end and React.js on the front end. And it uses the DocuSign eSignature Python SDK. Which you can see here in the requirements tab, is just imported as DocuSign eSign. All of the API calls are going to be in this app folder here under API, and specifically in the requests.py folder. So you can see here we have our minor major function, which is going to be for the scenario that we just completed in the app. So the first thing that we do is we get, it gets all of the information from that form as we just filled out. So I can just actually go back over just so that we can follow along a little bit. And you can see that all of these fields are going to be pulled into this student object right here, which is going to be defined over in this source folder, which is where all of the front end code lives, under request major minor change in index.js. So here you can see the object, and you can see, even if you scroll down, you can see the logic for the form validation. And then you can see here that the student object is going to be returned as well as a callback URL, which just tells the app where to return to after the signing session has ended, has been completed. So yeah, so you can keep that in mind, that is what the student object is. And then we'll go back to this requests file. And then you can see that that's set into the student variable. And then we also have that return URL set into our envelope arguments. Okay. So now we're going to go, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a DocuSign document, and we're going to use an HTML template that we have in our app already, and it's going to be in this templates folder, and you can see here that this is where the HTML file lives for that. And then we're going to pass in also our student object and then the envelope args. So we can go to this method, which is going to be down here in document.py. And this is where we're going to create our envelope. So we're setting all of these student variables as we saw, and then we're going to create this, which is based on the DocuSign model for a document. And so we'll set in this document base 64, which we convert up here for our document, which is that HTML file. And then we're going to set a name file extension, and document ID. Document ID doesn't have to be anything unique or anything. You can just set it to be 1, 2, 3 or whatever you prefer. And then we'll add a signer to the envelope. So this is also using a SDK model. And here we can fill in our student object information, including our email, first name, last name. And then we'll also set a recipient ID and routing order. And then this is also coming from our envelope arguments here. And then we have to set our all of the tabs. So wherever we want our document to be editable. So if we go back over, let me fill this in real fast. Just so that we can pull up the document so that we can kind of have a reference for what we're looking at in the code. So here back in the signing session, you can see we have 3 tabs, email address, signature, and initials. So that's what we're setting up over here. And this is all using models that are defined in the SDK. So we have a sign here tab. And this is using anchor positioning to set where the tab is going to be. But that's basically setting up this signature tab right here. And then we also have the initial here, which is also using anchor positioning. And then we have this email field as well. So this this required true is making sure that it's filled out, and then locked false, which is making it editable. And then this value equals student email is just what's pre-filling that tab already, so that whatever I put in the form automatically shows up, but I can still change it. So all of these tabs are going to be Sorry,
I don't mean to interrupt you, folks. This is Kendall. I'm just here moderating the session. We did have a question come in, so I'll put it up on the screen here. He says, just to confirm, is it the captive signer who is completing those form fields?
The captive, just to confirm, is it the captive signer who is completing those form fields? It's going to be whoever you put in for the email, or whoever is on this app. So yeah, the user.
Great.
Yeah, and then sorry if that's not clear. Let me know. And so yeah, all of these tabs here are going to be assigned to the signer. As you can see, they're set up here in the sign here tabs, email tabs, and initial here tabs. And then when we create our envelope definition, again, using a SDK model, that's when we're going to bring everything together. So we'll have an email subject, and then that's where we attach our document. And then our recipients is that signer that we created, and the signer holds where all of the tabs are. And then we're going to set the status equals to sent. And that just requests that the envelope is going to be created and sent. All right, and then we'll return the envelope definition. So we'll go back into this requests.py file. And then the next thing that we can do after we have that is we're going to actually send the envelope. So for that, we'll go into this envelope.py file. And into this send method is what we're using. And so we have this access token and the account ID, which is saved in the session when we authenticate, as well as this configured instance for to create the DS client. And then we're going to use that to create an envelopes API with the SDK. And then we'll use our create envelope method of the envelope API. Which uses the envelope definition that we just created. And then that we'll return the envelope back to this results variable, and this is returning the envelope ID. So back here in requests, we can see we're setting that into the envelope ID variable. And then the next thing that we're going to do here is we save that envelope ID into our session. So in session data, we can see over here, we just have a list of document IDs ongoing for the session of all of the documents that you signed using the app. And that's basically used for the status page. So when we go to that status page, we can use all of the envelopes ID and get their and we can get their status, and we can also get the documents if we choose to download using the DocuSign SDK methods as well. All right. Yeah, so that's basically it for that scenario there. I can go into a little bit on how the status page works if you want. So I'll just choose finish later for this. Yeah. And then we'll go back to the home page. Yeah, so as you can see, yeah, we both have, now both of these are here in the change minor major field documents. Well, would you guys rather see how the status page works, or did you want to click check out a new scenario? We can also do this, which is using the Click API. Is there any opinions? I'm not sure where the questions are coming in at or anything.
If you switch your tab where you see private chat to comments.
Oh, got it.
There you go.
Oh.
We have another question from John down there as well.
Okay. Okay. What are some good workflow best practices? Ooh. Okay, so no, not too much interest in the Click API. Thanks, John. What are some good workflow best practices when automating the process of sending envelopes where signers complete them and they go back and forth between the DocuSign originator? I can definitely get back to you with a better answer for that rather than off the top of my head, John, after I'm done with the talk. But thank you for the question. Yeah, so I guess going back to the code, we can look at how to get the status for that, for downloading that. So here we can see in the envelope download function, we can use all of these. We can use the envelope ID and the document ID, which again, which we stored in the session, and we can use this envelope download method, which is over here back in the envelopes document. Yeah, so this is the SDK method we use to get the document. And again, we're using our account ID and the document ID and envelope ID, and then this certificate equals true. That's basically just telling the SDK that we want the certificate. So even if you have like the query parameter to download the certificate, you still need to pass this into the method in order to be able to download that. So that's just something to keep in mind. Yeah, and then that's basically it. Let's see. Would you guys want to look into the authentication methods, or let's see. That's been covered. Okay, perfect. Okay, well, I can just walk you through, I have about 15 minutes left. We can walk through the third scenario, which is sign up for extracurricular activities. Okay. So again, the same form validation, and you can go here to see behind the scenes. And this scenario uses DocuSign payments, so you'll need to have a payment gateway in order to use this example with your developer account. But as I said, you can log in with a pre-configured account, which you'll be able to use for this example. Okay, so I'll just fill in my information here. This is fake data. But yeah, so you can choose from this list of activities and proceed. And then as you can see, that's all filled in here. And then, so we'll agree here, and then the payment details I'll be able to fill in actually after I sign the document. So again, I'll choose my signature, adopt and sign. And after you choose your signature, you can also change it here if you want. But yeah, so I'll click finish, and then keep in mind this number right here, which is what we're going to use for our dummy information for this sample app. So I'm just going to choose credit debit, and then I'll type in that dummy number that it told us to type in. And then I can choose anything for this, doesn't really matter. And pay and finish. Right. So that's generally what it would look like if you wanted to use a payments tab with DocuSign. And then this signing complete page is the same. And again, you should see that on your status page as well. Okay, so back into this request page. We'll scroll down. You can see this is the payment activity method for the example, getting the object the same way that the other example did. And then this is using all of our payment gateway account, all of that extra information. And then we'll be creating an envelope in a similar way. So I'll go and see the differences for this one. Envelope. Or sorry, document. And we'll use this create with payment this time. Yeah, so the main difference here is you can see that we have a number tab that we're using for the price, where we can set in, let me go back to it so that we can have a reference. And that's just used for this number tab here. And then you have the formula total, which is a formula tab. And then you can see the formulas here. And that's just to calculate this total here. And then you can use this payment line item model from DocuSign and payment details, which is using your payment gateway account ID. And then you can set the currency. gateway name, payment line. And then you have this formula tab and signer as before. And so, yeah, that's basically pretty similar to the other example as well. And then we'll send it as before, set the document, save the document to the session as before. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Alrighty. Okay, let's see. Are there any insights you can share just generally about JWT authentication and an integration workflow where the DocuSign envelope creator doesn't have to be present? So for a workflow where the DocuSign envelope creator doesn't have to be present, so I assume you mean like something where you wouldn't have to sign the document right away as soon as you are filling in that information. Is that right? More like the sender doesn't have to be present. So basically, this is all, yeah, so this is all happening automatically. So as far as like the sender, so this is what we're setting is like the recipient. So when you choose one of these, like the email is for the recipient. So that's whoever the user is who's needing to sign the envelope. So once you click submit, that's all sent automatically. You don't have to have the sender manually send that. And then as far as like the user needing to be present, if you do like a different flow, like these are both using embedded signing, but if you wanted to use signing using an email or an email session, then basically what that would do was it would send the recipient an email, and then at their leisure, they could just open that email and sign the document when they would want to. And there's an example for that on our DocuSign code launchers. MyUni uses JWT, and it also has an authorization code grant authentication option as well if you were to sign in with your developer account. As you can see, there's two login options here. So the developer account option uses authorization code grant, and the pre-configured login uses JWT. What would be the easiest way to pre-populate / pre-fill fields on a template before a signer signs it? Similar to how a PowerForm works, but using the REST API. Yeah, so these examples use the form data to pre-fill the tabs, but if you have the information from like another means, you could just as easily use that as well. As we saw in the first walkthrough we did for the email tab, it uses the information from the fields to fill in the student tab here, or the email tab, I mean. Okay. Okay, and can you please tell me what data is required to successfully call the eSignature API? Things like the endpoint headers and data that is supposed to be sent. I've tried to make API calls, but I'm always getting a 404 not found error. I need assistance on what the problem is. So I can show you a little bit in the authentication part of it, but basically what you'll need is you'll need to get an access token using one of the recommended OAuth flows. And for that, let's go here. Let's see. Let's see. I'm not quite sure where that code lives for this app. But basically, you'll need, there's a really good page on the Developer Center about authentication for that as well. But basically, the endpoint is demo.docusign.net/REST API, and then you can use any of the endpoints found on the API reference page. All of the endpoints are here. So for example, for envelopes, here you could, this is the endpoint for creating an envelope is here. So it would be /REST API v2.1 account ID envelopes. And then you can use the OAuth methods in the SDK to get your account ID if you're not sure where it is. But the account ID can also be found on your apps and keys page. If I were logged in, I could show you. Let's see. So you'll need your endpoint and the headers, so that the header, the access token will be passed into an authentication header with the keyword bearer and then access token as the value. And if you need more specific help with that, we can follow up after. Okay, and then I'm confused between setting tab values on existing tabs and creating tabs that didn't exist before. Okay. Okay, so basically, Kendall, do you know how one could follow up after specifically?
Yes, absolutely. I'm going to post a link for the Slack channel that we're using for this hackathon. So for any questions that we mentioned, we'll follow up after the stream. It will be posted in that Slack channel. Give me just a second. I'm pulling up the link for everybody now.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, and then just to answer a couple more questions, we are out of time. And again, I apologize for being late to this. But just to walk through the terminology once again. So an envelope is basically everything containing your document and your senders and your tabs. And your tab is anything where you want the user to fill in information or anywhere where you want there to be modifiable information, or anywhere where you want to set information to equal something that will differ from envelope to envelope. So that could be many things. That could be like the signing tab, the email tab, the payments tab, basically just fields. And then, yeah, unfortunately we are out of time. But sorry if anything was confusing, and thank you all for coming. And yeah, I guess that's it.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll go ahead and end the stream now. Thanks everyone for all of your questions. We'll post some answers in the Slack channel, and if you are unable to find the resources you need, you can also tweet us at DocuSign API, and we'll make sure to get your questions answered. Thank you.